October 24th, 1537, Hampton Court Palace. As dawn broke over the Thames, the most beloved queen in Tudor history drew her final breath, whispering her husband's name with her dying words. But Jane Seymour's story didn't end in that candlelit chamber. It began. Within days of her funeral, servants reported seeing a woman in white wandering the very halls where she had once walked as queen, her translucent form searching endlessly through rooms that echoed with memories of a love that death itself couldn't claim. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about the afterlife, because some bonds are simply too powerful for the grave to sever. So before we begin, subscribe and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Our story begins in the sprawling corridors of Hampton Court Palace, where tragedy and triumph walked hand in hand during the tumultuous reign of Henry VIII. In 1536, as autumn painted the Thames Valley in shades of gold and crimson, a young woman named Jane Seymour found herself thrust into the most dangerous position in Tudor England. Queen of England. Jane Seymour, born around 1508 to a minor noble family in Wiltshire, had served as lady-in-waiting to both Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn before capturing the king's attention. Unlike her predecessor, who met her fate on the executioner's block, Jane possessed a gentle demeanor that promised the domestic tranquility Henry desperately craved. Contemporary court observers described her as possessing a fair complexion and gentle countenance, with pale skin that seemed almost translucent in candlelight. The grand halls of Hampton Court Palace provided the perfect backdrop for Henry's third marriage. Cardinal Wolsey's magnificent creation, with its soaring hammer-beam ceilings and intricate tapestries, had been transformed into Henry's principal residence. The palace's labyrinthine layout included over 1,000 rooms, connected by countless staircases and passages where whispered conversations could change the fate of nations. Among these was the Silverstick Staircase, a narrow stone passage that led to the royal apartments overlooking Clock Court. According to historical records, Jane's primary mission was clear: provide Henry with the male heir that had eluded his previous marriages. The pressure was unbearable, particularly after Anne Boleyn's execution in May 1536. Jane married Henry just 11 days later, in a private ceremony that emphasized discretion over celebration. The court held its breath, knowing that Jane's survival depended entirely on her ability to produce a son. What happened next would change everything. In September 1537, Jane entered confinement at Hampton Court Palace, following the rigid protocols demanded of royal births. The Queen's apartments were prepared with meticulous care, heavy tapestries blocking out light and air according to contemporary medical beliefs. The room where she would give birth overlooked the palace's Clock Court, its windows offering views of the courtyard where courtiers gathered daily to conduct their business. Little did anyone know that tragedy was about to strike in the very heart of Tudor triumph. On October 12, 1537, after a labor described by court physicians as long and difficult, Jane successfully delivered the future Edward VI at 2 o'clock in the morning. Hampton Court Palace erupted in celebration, with bells ringing across London to announce the birth of England's long-awaited male heir. Henry, overcome with joy, finally had his legitimate son, but the euphoria was tragically short-lived. While baby Edward thrived, Jane's condition rapidly deteriorated. Contemporary accounts describe a queen who seemed to glow with maternal joy one moment, only to be consumed by fever the next. Palace physicians, limited by 16th-century medical knowledge, could do little as infection ravaged her weakened body. The same room that had witnessed England's greatest triumph was about to become the stage for its most heartbreaking tragedy. The events of October 24, 1537, would leave a permanent mark on this place that endures to this day. Historical documents from the royal archives record that Jane died just after midnight, 12 days after giving birth. Contemporary sources describe Henry's devastation as unprecedented, with court observers noting that the king wept openly for days following her death. Unlike his previous wives, Jane had achieved what no other could. She had given Henry his son and earned his eternal devotion. What makes Jane's story particularly poignant is the timing of her death. She died before she could see her son christened, before she could witness him take his first steps, and before she could experience the joy of motherhood beyond those brief 12 days. According to court records, Henry considered Jane his true wife and would be buried beside her nearly a decade later. The unfinished business of their interrupted love story, combined with her tragic circumstances, created the perfect conditions for supernatural manifestations that would soon begin haunting Hampton Court Palace. The first documented supernatural encounter occurred in 1643, over a century after Jane's death, when Master Thomas Brown, the palace's newly appointed curator of manuscripts, experienced something that defied all rational explanation. According to his detailed written testimony preserved in the royal archives, Brown was conducting his evening rounds through the royal apartments when he encountered an inexplicable presence on the Silverstick Stairs. The temperature plummeted without warning, Brown testified in his official report to King Charles I. What had been a mild October evening suddenly became bone-chilling cold, as though winter itself had descended upon that narrow staircase. He described how his breath became visible in the suddenly frigid air, and how an oppressive silence fell over the normally creaking palace corridors. The brass candle holder in his hand began to tremble uncontrollably, though whether from cold or fear, he could not determine. Brown reported feeling an overwhelming sensation of being watched, describing eyes that burned with desperate longing fixed upon him from the shadows above. The experienced curator, accustomed to the palace's natural sounds after decades of service, noted that the usual settling noises had ceased completely. Even the ever-present scurrying of mice in the walls had stopped, as though all living creatures had fled from an unseen presence. Most unsettling of all was the scent that accompanied this supernatural encounter. Brown documented smelling white roses, Jane Seymour's favorite flower, despite it being October and no flowers present anywhere in the vicinity. The fragrance was so intense it became almost suffocating, filling his nostrils with a sweetness that seemed to carry undertones of something far more disturbing. When Brown finally gathered courage to ascend the stairs, he found nothing but empty corridors and the lingering cold that took hours to dissipate. The most thoroughly documented escalation occurred during the reign of William and Mary in 1694, when multiple witnesses simultaneously experienced Jane's presence during the anniversary of Prince Edward's birth. Lady Margaret Fitzhugh, mistress of the household, and her assistant Sarah Whitmore were conducting their monthly inspection of the royal chambers when they encountered what they later described as a presence of overwhelming maternal grief. According to Lady Fitzhugh's sworn testimony before the palace chaplain, the encounter began at precisely 11:45 in the evening as they ascended the Silverstick Stairs. The air grew thick as honey, she recorded, and each step required tremendous effort, as though we were walking through invisible treacle. Both women reported feeling an inexplicable urge to turn back, but something compelled them forward despite their mounting terror. Sarah Whitmore's separate account, preserved in the palace employment records, corroborates every detail of Lady Fitzhugh's testimony. She described hearing the distinct rustle of silk gowns, though both women wore simple woolen dresses appropriate for their evening duties. The sound seemed to emanate from just ahead of them on the staircase, as though an invisible figure in elaborate court dress was ascending the same steps. "Then we saw her," Lady Fitzhugh testified, her usually steady handwriting betraying her emotional state in irregular strokes across the parchment. A lady in white, carrying a single candle, moving with purpose toward the royal apartments. The apparition appeared translucent, allowing glimpses of the stone wall behind her flowing gown, yet possessed enough substance to cast a shadow in the flickering candlelight. Most remarkably, both witnesses independently reported that the ghostly figure turned to look directly at them. Whitmore described eyes filled with such desperate sadness that my heart nearly stopped beating, while Lady Fitzhugh noted a gaze that seemed to search my very soul for something lost. The specter's mouth moved as though attempting to speak, but no sound emerged beyond a whispered name that both women swore was Henry. The encounter reached its climax when the apparition suddenly vanished, leaving behind only the overwhelming scent of white roses and a profound sense of maternal longing that reduced both experienced palace staff members to tears. Investigation the following morning revealed that the royal apartments had been somehow disturbed despite being securely locked. Fresh candle wax was found dripped across the floor in a pattern leading from the staircase to the chamber where Jane had given birth to Edward. Yet no living person had possessed keys to those rooms. The most dramatic and extensively documented supernatural encounter occurred on October the 12th, 1928, exactly 391 years after Edward VI's birth. Sir Edmund Hartwell, Hampton Court's chief historian and a man known for his rigorous scientific skepticism, experienced an encounter so profound it changed his entire worldview regarding the supernatural. Sir Edmund had been working late in the palace archives, researching Tudor court documents for his upcoming biography of Henry VIII, when he decided to walk through the royal apartments for inspiration. His detailed account, written the following morning and witnessed by 3 colleagues, provides the most comprehensive description of Jane Seymour's ghost ever recorded. "I was ascending the Silverstick Stairs when the world around me seemed to shift," Sir Edmund wrote in his meticulous scholarly hand. The electric lighting installed just 5 years prior suddenly dimmed to the warm glow of candlelight, and the 20th century renovations appeared to melt away before my eyes. He described watching in fascination and terror as the staircase transformed back to its original Tudor appearance, complete with worn stone steps and hand-forged iron railings. The temperature drop was so severe that Sir Edmund's breath formed clouds in the suddenly medieval air. He could hear music drifting from the great hall below, the haunting melodies of lutes and virginals that had been silent for centuries. The scent of herbs used to mask Tudor-era odors filled his nostrils, along with the ever-present fragrance of white roses that seemed to intensify with each step upward. Then she appeared with crystalline clarity that left no room for doubt or rationalization. Jane Seymour materialized at the top of the staircase, dressed in a flowing white gown that seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. Her pale hair was arranged in the distinctive Tudor style, held by a simple gold circlet that caught and reflected the ghostly candlelight. Sir Edmund noted that she appeared exactly as Hans Holbein had painted her, yet somehow more real than any portrait could convey. "She looked directly at me with eyes that held the weight of centuries," Sir Edmund testified. "There was no malevolence in her gaze, only an indescribable sadness mixed with desperate hope." The apparition raised one translucent hand, pointing toward the royal apartments where she had died, and for the first time in any recorded encounter, she spoke clearly enough to be understood. "Where is my king?" she asked in a voice that seemed to echo from beyond the grave. He promised to return before our son's first birthday." The words carried such profound longing that Sir Edmund found himself weeping despite his natural skepticism. He realized he was witnessing a mother and wife still bound to the earthly realm by promises unfulfilled and love interrupted by death. The climactic moment came when Jane began to move toward him, her white gown flowing like liquid moonlight. Sir Edmund described feeling an overwhelming urge to comfort this tortured spirit, to explain that centuries had passed and both Henry and Edward had long since joined her in death. But as he stepped forward to speak, the apparition suddenly vanished with an expression of infinite disappointment crossing her ethereal features. The aftermath proved as remarkable as the encounter itself. Sir Edmund found himself back in the modern palace, electric lights blazing overhead, but the temperature remained frigid for over an hour. Most significantly, he discovered fresh white rose petals scattered across the stairs where Jane had stood, despite roses being out of season, and no flowers present anywhere in the palace. Chemical analysis conducted by Scotland Yard at Sir Edmund's request confirmed the petals were genuine, although their preservation was scientifically impossible given the circumstances. Contemporary sightings of Jane Seymour's ghost continue to this day, with Hampton Court Palace staff and visitors reporting encounters that mirror historical accounts with startling consistency. In October 2003, the palace CCTV captured the image of a ghostly figure apparently flinging open a fire door. While palace officials have never confirmed this footage shows Jane specifically, the timing coincides with increased supernatural activity during October anniversary periods. Palace security guard Michael Thompson reported in 2019 encountering a woman in white carrying a candle near the Silverstick Stairs during his midnight rounds. According to his incident report, Thompson followed the figure for several minutes before she vanished near the entrance to the royal apartments. Her ghost is also reported to have been seen by staff and visitors, this time walking on the Silverstick Stairs holding a burning candle. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a tutor, historian conducting research at Hampton Court in 2022, experienced what she describes as an overwhelming sense of maternal grief while examining documents in the royal archives. She reported sudden temperature drops and the distinct scent of roses during her evening research sessions, phenomena that intensified whenever she studied materials related to Jane Seymour's brief reign. Jane is said to appear on the Silverstick Stairs, a staircase that once led to the room in which she gave birth and later died. Her apparition is far less frequent than others, appearing only on the anniversary of her son's birth. Modern investigations have confirmed this pattern, with paranormal activity spiking dramatically every October 12th, suggesting Jane's spirit remains eternally bound to the moment of her greatest triumph and deepest sorrow. What keeps Jane Seymour's spirit bound to Hampton Court Palace after nearly 5 centuries? Perhaps some bonds transcend death itself, tethering souls to the places where love and loss intertwined so completely that even the grave cannot sever those connections. Jane achieved what no other wife could give Henry VIII, yet death robbed her of witnessing their son's future and enjoying the king's eternal devotion she had finally earned. The next time you visit Hampton Court Palace and walk the Silverstick Stairs, remember that you may not be alone. Listen for the rustle of silk gowns. Breathe deeply for the scent of white roses, and consider whether the woman in white ascending those ancient steps is still searching for her beloved king. Perhaps some love stories are too powerful for death to end, leaving echoes that resonate through eternity. If this tale captivated you, don't forget to hit subscribe and let us know your own ghost stories in the comments below.